Why you wouldn't survive a day in the Wild West. The horizon is still entirely lost in the deep, velvet blackness of the pre-dawn hours. You are standing in the absolute center of an expanse so wide, so utterly flat, that it feels as though you are the only living soul left on Earth. The air out here is sharp, almost thin, carrying the faint, metallic scent of cooling desert earth, ancient dust, and dormant sagebrush. Everything is perfectly, unnervingly still. There is no rustle of leaves, for there are no trees to catch the wind. There is only the vast, open, heavy silence of the western plains nearby. Your horse shifts its weight, the soft, hollow thud of its hoof against the dry, packed soil sounding like a distant drumbeat echoing in an empty room. Its breathing is deep, slow, and rhythmic, a steady, warm inhalation that seems to match the pulse of the sleeping land itself. You stand completely still for a few minutes, letting your eyes adjust to the absolute absence of light. You are in no hurry. The sun will rise when it is ready, and until then, you have the quiet. Begin by reaching down toward your bedroll. Feel the coarse, heavy texture of the wool blanket as you slowly slide your hand across its cold surface. It is damp with the night's morning dew, holding a faint chill that makes your fingers tingle. Fold it with immense care, feeling the thick weight of the fabric as it bunches and pleats in your arms. Each movement is a deliberate exercise in patience. You are not just packing gear, you are anchoring yourself to this specific moment in time. Feel the ground beneath your heavy boots, firm, unyielding, and ancient. You are a small, temporary part of this massive landscape, and for now, that is more than enough. Now, lean back against the wooden fence post of the corral, if you can call it that, just a few rough-hewn pine logs driven into the hard dirt. The wood is splintered and rough beneath your palms, holding the residual cold of the desert night. You listen to the silence. Why was it so difficult for anyone to survive out here? Because the silence itself was a heavy weight. It forces you to listen to your own thoughts, to the steady thumping of your own heart. In the modern world, noises cover the silence, but out here, the silence covers everything. It wraps around you like a heavy, protective cloak, shielding you from the chaos of the world you left behind. Look up at the stars. They are not like the stars you see from a city window. Here, they are brilliant, piercing needles of white light against a canvas of absolute ink. They seem so close that you could reach out and brush your fingers against them, yet they are unimaginably distant, completely indifferent to the tiny figure standing on the dirt below. Watch how they don't twinkle so much as burn with a steady, quiet intensity. They have looked down on these plains for thousands of years, watching travelers come and go, watching campfires burn down to ash, completely unchanged by the passage of time. Let that indifference soothe you. You don't need to control anything tonight. You don't need to fix anything. The universe is moving along its tracks, perfectly balanced, perfectly calm, and you are simply drifting along with it. Consider the grass beneath your feet, the short, dry grama grass that covers millions of acres of this territory. In the dark, you cannot see its pale gold color, but you can hear it. When the faintest, almost imperceptible breath of air moves across the ground, the grass whispers. It is a dry, paper-like sound, a soft hiss that rises and falls like the breathing of the earth. In the old days, a seasoned traveler could tell the direction of the wind just by the tone of that whisper. They could tell if a storm was brewing 3 days away over the mountains, or if the air was drawing dry heat from the southern deserts. Tonight, the grass tells no stories of danger. It simply hums a low, monotonous tune, a song of endurance. You reach into your pocket and find your pocket watch. You don't open it to check the time. There is no light to read the face anyway, but your thumb traces the smooth, worn silver of its casing. The metal is cold against your skin, a sharp contrast to the warmth of your own body. You feel the faint, rhythmic ticking vibrating through the silver shell. Tick, tick, tick. It is a tiny, mechanical pulse, a fragile invention of man trying to keep track of something that the desert does not recognize. Out here, time is measured in miles, in the changing color of the dirt, in the gradual drying of a water hole, and in the slow transition of shadows. The ticking of the watch feels small, distant, and unimportant. You slip it back into your pocket, letting the mechanical rhythm dissolve back into the grand, natural stillness of the prairie. Your horse lets out another long sigh, the sound ending in a soft vibration of its lips. It stretches its neck, reaching down to nudge at a patch of dry grass. The faint clink of the bit in its mouth breaks the silence again. A sharp, metallic note that feels comforting rather than disruptive. It is a reminder of companionship. You are not entirely alone in this void. You have a partner whose heart beats steadily, whose instincts are sharp, and whose survival is entirely tied to yours. You step closer to the animal, running your hand along its neck. The coarse hair is thick, and beneath it, you can feel the solid, powerful muscle, completely relaxed but ready to move when the light finally changes. The cold begins to settle into your shoulders, the kind of deep, penetrating chill that comes right before the dawn breaks. It is the absolute coldest moment of the night, the hour when the earth has completely radiated away the heat of the previous day. You pull your collar up higher around your neck, the stiff canvas of your jacket scraping lightly against your chin. Instead of fighting the cold, you accept it. You let it remind you that you are alive, that your senses are awake, and that you are standing on the edge of something immense. The darkness around you begins to feel less like an empty void and more like a solid, protective room, keeping the rest of the world at bay while you prepare for what lies beyond the horizon. The darkness begins to soften, shifting from an absolute ink to a heavy, charcoal gray. The shapes of the landscape, the low ridges, the distant mesas, the silhouette of your resting horse, slowly begin to separate themselves from the sky. It is still too dark to see details, but the world is no longer a complete void. The transition is incredibly slow, a gradual unveiling that demands your complete patience. You move toward your saddle, which sits inverted on a low wooden bench near the cold ashes of last night's fire. The scent of the leather hits you before you even touch it. A deep, rich aroma of tanned hide, old sweat, and the sharp, chemical tang of neatsfoot oil used to keep the material supple against the brutal desert sun. You reach down and lift the heavy saddle. The weight of it is familiar and grounding, pulling down on your arms and forcing you to plant your boots firmly into the loose dirt. You swing it carefully onto the back of your horse. The animal does not flinch. It simply adjusts its stance, its hooves making a dull, sliding sound in the soil as it prepares for the burden. The heavy wool saddle blanket settles first, absorbing the impact, and then the leather tree follows with a solid, muted thud. Every movement you make is practiced, a dance you have performed hundreds of times under the open sky. There is a deep, meditative comfort in the repetition of these actions. Your mind does not have to wander. It settles entirely into the physical reality of the task. You reach beneath the horse's belly to catch the cinch strap. The leather is cool and slightly stiff from the night air. As you loop it through the heavy iron ring, you can feel the textured surface of the braided cord beneath your fingertips. You pull the strap upward, slowly, waiting for the horse to exhale. In the West, horses learn to bloat their chests when being saddled, a clever trick to keep the cinch loose later in the day. You wait, your hand holding the tension, until you hear the animal let out a long, rumbling breath. You pull tighter, securing the tongue of the buckle into the worn leather hole. Click. The sound is sharp and definitive, echoing softly in the morning quiet. You pull it once more to ensure it is snug, feeling the resistance of the horse's ribs against the strap. It is a bond of trust, Too tight, and the horse will tire quickly. Too loose, and the saddle will shift on a steep trail, risking a dangerous fall. Next come the stirrups. You drop them down, letting the heavy wood and iron rings swing freely against the horse's flanks. They make a low, clacking sound as they hit the leather fenders. You reach down to adjust the stirrup leathers, tracing the large metal rivets with your thumb. You know the exact hole your buckle needs to occupy, the third one down, worn slightly wider than the others from the weight of your boots pressing into it over countless miles. You slide the leather sleeve up, adjust the massive iron pin, and slide the sleeve back down to lock it in place. Your fingers are slightly numb from the morning chill, making the task slower than usual, but the forced slowness is peaceful. Prevents errors. In this wilderness, an error with your tack means a thrown shoe, a sore back for your horse, or a broken strap 40 miles from the nearest well. You move to the front of the horse to prepare the bridle. The animal lowers its head slightly, cooperative and calm in the dimming shadows. You hold the headstall in your left hand, your fingers brushing against the soft, sensitive skin of its muzzle. With your right hand, you guide the cold iron bit toward its teeth. The metal is freezing, and you hold it in your palm for a few moments first, using your own body heat to take the sharpest sting out of the iron. When you press it gently against the bars of the horse's mouth, the animal opens up, accepting the bit with a familiar metallic clink. You slide the leather strap over its ears, smoothing down the forelock with a gentle, sweeping motion of your hand. The horse champs on the bit a few times, the iron rattling softly against its teeth. A steady, comforting rhythm that signals the readiness of your mount. You step back and look at your work. The horse stands fully rigged, a silhouette of readiness against the increasingly pale sky. You check the saddlebags, ensuring the heavy canvas flaps are buckled down tight over your sparse rations. Inside, there is nothing but a small sack of flour, a tin of salt, a few strips of dried beef, and a handful of coffee beans wrapped in a greaseproof cloth. It is a minimalist existence, stripped of all modern noise and excess. Every ounce of weight has been calculated. Your canteen hangs from the saddle horn, its will cover still damp from the night, which will help keep the water inside cool when the heat of the day inevitably arrives. You run your hand one last time down the horse's shoulder, feeling the warmth of its skin rising to meet your palm. The preparation is complete. The gear is secure. The horse is ready, and the vast, unspoken expanse of the territory is waiting for the first hoofprint. The sky is no longer gray. It is transformed into a soft, glowing opal, washed with pale streaks of amber and lavender along the eastern rim. The transition from darkness to light is subtle, yet it changes the entire texture of the world around you. The shadows cast by the low bushes are impossibly long, stretching across the dirt like dark fingers reaching toward the west. You place your left boot into the heavy wooden stirrup, feeling the familiar creak of the leather fender as it twists under your weight. With a smooth, practiced motion, you swing your right leg over the saddle. The leather seats you with a deep, muffled sigh, settling your weight directly over the horse's center of gravity. You adjust your hat, pulling the brim down just enough to shield your eyes from the incoming glare, and give a gentle nudge with your heels. The journey begins not with a rush, but with a slow, deliberate walk. The first few steps are always the loudest. The horse's iron shoes strike the packed earth with a rhythmic, hollow sound. Thud, clack, thud, clack. A steady cadence that will become the soundtrack to your next several hours. The morning air hits your face, cooler now that you are moving, carrying the sharp, sweet scent of crushed sagebrush as your horse's hooves brush against the low plants. Behind you, the tiny campsite you occupied just an hour ago vanishes into the vastness, leaving nothing but a circle of cold ashes that the wind will erase before midday. You do not look back. Out here, looking back serves no purpose. Your eyes must always be fixed on the trail ahead, reading the ground for loose rocks, badger holes, or the sudden movement of a startled rattlesnake as you cover the first mile. The sun finally clears the edge of the world. It doesn't burst forth. It rises with a slow, majestic gravity, a sliver of intense, molten gold that instantly floods the plains with warmth. The effect is immediate. The dampness on your wool coat begins to give off a faint, almost invisible mist as the heat dries the fabric. The pale gold grama grass, which looked like simple dust in the moonlight, now shimmers like a sea of copper. The world expands exponentially in every direction. Mesas that appeared as flat, dark walls a few miles away suddenly reveal their true nature. Deep canyons, jagged ridges, and layers of red and orange rock that have been carved by wind and water over millions of years. The sheer scale of the landscape is humbling. It makes your presence feel incredibly small, a speck of life moving across a canvas built for giants. You let the reins hang loose in your left hand, allowing the horse to find its own natural rhythm. It knows the pace it can maintain for hours without tiring, a steady 4-mile-an-hour walk that devours distance through sheer persistence. You watch the rhythmic movement of the horse's ears, forward, then back, then tilted to the side, constantly listening to the environment. It hears things long before you do. The low hum of insects waking up in the grass, the distant scurry of a ground squirrel, or the high, lonely cry of a red-tailed hawk circling in the thermal currents above. You begin to align your own senses with the animals. You stop thinking about the destination, about where you need to camp tonight, or how many miles are left to the nearest water source. You simply exist in the space between the hooves and the horizon. The silence of the morning is different from the silence of the night. The night silence was heavy and isolating, but the morning silence is alive. It is a quiet composition of small, natural sounds. The leather of your saddle gives a rhythmic creak with every rise and fall of the horse's shoulders. Creak, slide, creak, slide. The iron bit in the horse's mouth makes a faint, liquid rattle as it moves its tongue. The wind, coming straight off the distant, snow-capped peaks to the north, makes a soft, rushing sound against the brim of your hat. These sounds do not disrupt the quiet. They define it. They create a protective barrier around your mind, filtering out the chaotic thoughts of the civilized world and replacing them with a deep, unbroken focus on the present moment. You look down at the dirt trail beneath you. It is barely a trail at all, just a slight indentation in the grass where others have passed weeks or months before. You notice the old tracks of an iron-rimmed wagon wheel, partially filled in by recent winds, and the deep, scattered prints of deer that crossed the path during the night. The history of the West is written in this dirt, a temporary record left by those who scratched a living out of the wilderness. But the wilderness always wins in the end. It slowly fills the tracks, grows over the paths, and reclaims everything. You feel a deep sense of peace in that reality. You are not here to conquer this land or change it. You are simply passing through, a silent witness to its ancient, beautiful, and uncaring routine. The soft, opal light of the morning has long since burned away, replaced by the harsh, unfiltered glare of the midday sun. The sky above is no longer a gentle blue. It has bleached into a pale, intense azure that seems to radiate heat from every angle. The horizon, which felt so crisp and defined a few hours ago, now vibrates and dances behind a thick veil of heat shimmer. Waves of distorted air rise from the baked earth, making the distant mesas look like floating islands in a mirage of liquid silver. There is no shade out here. The few scattered juniper bushes are too low and twisted to offer any real shelter. Their dark, dusty green leaves curled tight to preserve what little moisture they hold. The rhythm of the journey has shifted. The morning's crisp energy has dissolved into a heavy, slow endurance. Your horse's head hangs a little lower now, its ears no longer darting back and forth, but fixed forward in a steady, determined focus. The iron shoes still strike the earth. Thud, clack, thud, clack. But the sound feels muffled, heavy, and exhausting under the weight of the heat. You can see the dark lines of dried sweat tracing the edges of the leather blanket on the horse's flanks, leaving white, salty crusts where the moisture has evaporated into the desert air. You feel the heat radiating directly off the animal's body, rising to meet the heavy, stagnant air around you. Your own body has settled into a state of quiet conservation. The brim of your hat is pulled as low as it can go, casting a sharp, dark shadow across your face that ends just above your chin. Your eyes are narrowed against the blinding reflection of the sun on the pale gold grass. Your throat feels dry like the dusty trail beneath your boots, and the skin on the back of your neck is tight and hot. Why was midday the most dangerous time for a traveler in this territory? Because the heat saps your judgment long before it saps your physical strength. It makes your mind wander. It makes the trail blur, and it tempts you to drink too much water too quickly, leaving your canteen dry when the afternoon sun hits its peak. You pull gently on the reins, guiding your horse toward the partial shadow of a massive, cracked sandstone boulder that has rolled down from a nearby ridge over a century ago. It is not much, but it breaks the direct glare of the sun. You swing your leg over the saddle and slide down to the ground. Your knees are stiff, and your boots sink an inch into the loose, burning sand with a soft crunch. You immediately unbuckle the cinch strap, loosening the saddle just enough to let the horse's chest expand and breathe, though you leave the rig on its back. The animal immediately drops its head to the dirt, letting out a long, shuddering breath of exhaustion. You sit down against the base of the boulder, finding the small patch of earth that the sun has not yet reached. The rock behind you is hot, but the dirt beneath you is relatively cool. You reach for your canteen. The wool cover is completely dry now, stiffened by the sun, but when you lift it, you can hear the beautiful, liquid sloshing of water inside. You unscrew the metal cap, the threads making a sharp, grating sound in the quiet. You do not gulp the water. You take a small sip, just enough to wet your dry tongue and the back of your throat, holding the liquid in your mouth for a few seconds before swallowing. Tastes of tin and warm canvas, but it feels like life itself. You pour a few drops into your palm and rub it across your horse's dry nostrils. The animal licks your hand, its rough tongue warm and dry. In this enforced stillness, the silence of the desert reaches its absolute peak. At night there is the wind, and in the morning there are the birds, but at noon the wilderness goes completely dead. The insects have crawled beneath the rocks. The hawks are resting in the high crevices of the canyons, and even the wind has died down to a stagnant, breathless hum. You close your eyes beneath the brim of your hat. You listen to the heavy, rhythmic thud of your own heart and the slow, deep breathing of your horse. There is nothing else. The modern world, with its deadlines, its constant noise, and its endless demands, feels like a dream you had in another lifetime. Out here, survival is reduced to the simplest elements: a patch of shade, a cup of water, and the patience to wait out the sun. You let your muscles go completely slack against the stone, drifting into a light, meditative state where the heat can no longer touch your mind. The brutal weight of the midday sun has finally begun to fracture. The intense, bleached-out azure of the sky shifts into a deeper, cooler cobalt as the afternoon advances. The sun is sinking toward the jagged teeth of the western mountains, and with its descent, the long shadows return to reclaim the land. The flat, silver mirages that danced over the baked earth evaporate into the cooling air, revealing the true contours of the trail ahead. The path gently slopes downward now, leaving the open, endless prairie behind and dipping into the mouth of a deep, winding canyon carved from ancient red sandstone. You guide your horse through the narrow entrance where the stone walls rise sharply on either side, twisting up toward the sky like frozen waves of crimson and rust. The change in atmosphere is immediate. The ambient temperature drops significantly within the canyon walls, offering a blessed relief that makes your skin cool beneath your sweat-dried shirt. The air here feels thicker, trapped between the towering cliffs, carrying a rich, earthy scent of damp stone, hidden pine needles, and the deep, clean perfume of wild juniper. Your horse notices the shift, too. Its head rises, its ears rotating independently as it monitors the echoes of its own movements bouncing off the rock surfaces. The acoustic landscape changes entirely inside the canyon. The open, empty silence of the plains is replaced by a strange, hollow resonance. Every sound is amplified and repeated by the stone walls. The rhythmic thud and clack of the iron shoes against the gravel trail sounds crisp and metallic, echoing forward into the shadows ahead before fading away. The leather of your saddle gives off a deep, resonant groan with every stride, a comforting, familiar mechanical sigh that feels much louder in this enclosed space. Even your own breathing sounds distinct, a slow, steady exhalation that mixes with the soft, whispering sigh of the wind as it brushes against the jagged ridges high above your head. Why was a canyon both a blessing and a trap for a lone traveler in the old days? Because while it offered shade from the burning sun and the promise of hidden water springs, it also stripped away your vision. You can no longer see the horizon. Your world is narrowed down to the 50 yards of gravel trail directly in front of your horse's muzzle and the vertical walls of stone that lock you in. A sudden flash flood from a storm 20 miles away could send a wall of water roaring through these narrows with no warning, or a loosened boulder could tumble from the rim above. But you do not let these thoughts create tension in your chest. You have learned to trust the instincts of your mount. The horse walks with a careful, deliberate stride, placing each hoof with absolute precision on the loose shale, completely untroubled by the shadows deepening around you. You look up at the strip of sky visible between the canyon rims. It is turning a brilliant, fiery copper, the last direct rays of the sun striking the upper levels of the red rock and making the stone look as though it is glowing from within. The contrast is stunning. The tops of the cliffs are ablaze with orange and gold light, while the canyon floor where you ride is already submerged in a cool, purple twilight. You watch a solitary cliff swallow dart out from a crevice high above, its tiny silhouette cutting sharp angles against the burning sky before vanishing back into the stone. The sheer beauty of the moment washes over you, a silent reward for enduring the harsh trials of the midday heat. You reach down and touch the canyon wall as your horse walks close to a narrow bend. The sandstone is rough, abrasive, and cool against your palm, its surface etched with thousands of tiny lines left by centuries of wind and ancient water. It feels incredibly solid, an unchanging monument to time that makes the fleeting worries of human life feel completely insignificant. You let your hands slide along the stone until the path widens again, releasing the physical connection but keeping the deep sense of permanence it brought to your mind. The trail twists once more, leading you deeper into the heart of the canyon, where the darkness is pooling thickly among the boulders. You are moving in perfect harmony with the fading light, sinking deeper into the quiet security of the wilderness, ready for whatever sanctuary the end of the trail will bring. The winding canyon finally releases you, its towering sandstone walls widening out until they spill you back onto the edge of the open, purple plains. The sun has slipped completely below the western peaks, leaving behind a magnificent, bruised sky painted in deep shades of violet, indigo, and a thin, fading streak of blood orange along the sharp line of the horizon. The heat of the day has been entirely broken, replaced by a cool, rising draft that moves across the flat expanse, causing the sea of wild grama grass to ripple and wave in the dimming light. It is the hour of the wolf, the brief, deceptive window of twilight where shapes blur, distances become hard to judge, and the desert seems to shift its form. As you guide your horse forward through the deepening dusk, a structure begins to materialize out of the purple shadows ahead. It sits alone against the vastness, a low, sprawling silhouette constructed from heavy, unpainted cottonwood logs that have weathered into a ghostly, silver-gray color over decades of exposure to the elements. This is an old way station, a forgotten outpost built during the early days of the trail, long since abandoned by the stagecoach lines and left to the mercies of the wilderness. The sod roof has partially caved in on one side, allowing wild desert weeds to grow upward toward the sky, and the wooden shutters hang loosely from rusted, hand-forged iron hinges that groan softly whenever the wind catches them. You slow your horse to a halt a few dozen yards from the perimeter. In the Old West, approaching any structure at twilight required absolute caution. An abandoned cabin was rarely empty. It could harbor a resting outlaw, a defensive homesteader, a pack of wild wolves, or a nest of rattlesnakes seeking shelter from the incoming night chill. You sit quietly in the saddle for several minutes, your eyes scanning the dark, empty rectangles of the windows, your ears straining against the vast silence. There is no scent of wood smoke in the air, no glimmer of lantern light through the cracks in the logs, and no sound of shifting boots. There is only the low, mournful whistle of the wind moving through the gaps in the timber and the steady, heavy breathing of your mount beneath you. Satisfied that the outpost is quiet, you nudge your horse forward, the iron shoes clicking softly against the scattered rocks near the threshold. You dismount, your boots hitting the dirt with a dull, heavy thud that feels incredibly loud in the twilight stillness. Your legs are stiff from the long hours in the saddle, the muscles aching with a dull, satisfying tiredness that tells the story of the miles you have conquered today. You lead the horse into the partial shelter of the roofless lean-to structure attached to the side of the main cabin. It is a secure spot, shielded from the biting northern wind that will inevitably sweep across the plains once the darkness becomes absolute. You begin the familiar, comforting ritual of dismantling your gear for the night. You unbuckle the heavy leather saddlebags, lifting them off the cantle and setting them carefully against a dry log. Next, you release the cinch strap, your fingers working by feel now as the last traces of daylight drain from the sky. You slide the heavy leather saddle off the horse's back, your muscles straining slightly against the weight, and place it inverted on the dirt floor to protect the fleece lining from dampness. The horse lets out a massive, vibrating sigh of pure relief, shaking its entire body until the iron buckles on its bridle rattle like loose coins. You rub a dry burlap sack vigorously down its sweat-stained back and neck, feeling the immense warmth of its skin rising to meet the cooling night air. You run your hand along the rough, silvered logs of the old outpost. The wood feels dry, brittle, and smooth in the places where the wind has sanded away the grain over 50 years. There is a profound, heavy peace in this place. It is a monument to human effort that has been gracefully reclaimed by the desert. The people who built these walls, who slept within them with their hands resting on their rifles, are all gone, but the shelter remains, offering its silent protection to another lonely traveler passing through the dark. You sit down on your rolled-out blanket, leaning your back against the solid timber, and watch the stars begin to pierce through the deep indigo dome above. The world is closing its eyes. The shadows are merging into one single, protective blanket of black, and you are completely safe within the ancient, silent heart of the territory. The twilight has dissolved completely, leaving behind a sky of absolute black that stretches from one invisible horizon to the other. The stars are fully awake now, millions of brilliant, icy diamonds clustered together in thick, glowing rivers across the dark ceiling of the world. They are so bright tonight that they cast faint, silvery shadows of you and your horse onto the dirt floor of the old outpost. The cold of the high plains arrives rapidly, a sharp, biting draft that drops the temperature by 30 degrees in a matter of minutes. You can see your own breath now, small, ghostly puffs of white mist that rise from your lips and vanish instantly into the dry night air. You kneel in the center of the roofless lean-to, sheltering yourself from the wind behind the thick cottonwood logs. It is time to build a small fire, not for cooking, but for warmth and the comforting companionship of light. You reach into your pocket and pull out a small piece of flint, a strip of steel, and a handful of dry, paper-like inner bark from a dead cottonwood tree you found down in the canyon. Your fingers are stiff from the cold, making your movements slow and clumsy, but you focus completely on the task. You strike the steel against the flint with a sharp downward stroke. A brilliant spark flies off the metal, catching the dry tinder. You lean in close, your face inches from the dirt, and blow gently, a slow, steady stream of air that coaxes the tiny red glow into a dancing yellow flame. You carefully feed the infant fire with small twigs of dry sagebrush. The wood is full of natural oils, and as it catches, it gives off a sharp, pleasant crackle and a thick, aromatic smoke that fills the air with the unmistakable scent of the western wilderness. It is a clean, comforting smell that instantly pushes back the cold and the isolation of the dark. You add a few thicker pieces of weathered pine logs you gathered from the caved-in roof. The fire grows, its warm, orange light dancing across the silver logs of the cabin and casting giant, flickering shadows that move rhythmically against the stone chimney. The heat touches your face, thawing your frozen skin and relaxing the tight muscles in your shoulders. A few yards away, your horse stands quietly in the shadows just beyond the firelight. The orange glow reflects in its large, intelligent eyes, making them burn like liquid copper in the dark. It has its head down, its muzzle buried in a small pile of dry grama grass you gathered for it. You can hear the steady, rhythmic sound of its teeth grinding the dry stalks. Crunch, slide, crunch, slide. A peaceful, domestic sound that grounds you in the middle of this massive, wild expanse. The animal is completely relaxed, its hind legs slightly tucked, trusting you entirely to keep watch through the dark hours of the night. Suddenly, from somewhere far out on the black ridges to the north, a high, lonely cry pierces the silence. It begins as a low, mournful wail, rises into a sharp, clear shriek, and then breaks into a series of rapid, staccato yips that echo off the distant canyon walls. Coyote. Within seconds, another voice answers from the east, and then another from the south, until the dark plains are alive with a haunting, beautiful chorus of wild voices. It is the true music of the West, a song of survival, territory, and freedom that has been sung over these dirt trails for thousands of years. Your horse raises its head for a moment, its ears swiveling toward the sound, but it does not panic. It knows, as you do, that the wolves of the desert are simply talking to the night, completely untroubled by your small presence. The chorus slowly fades, dying out one voice at a time until the immense, heavy silence of the desert reclaims the land. You lean back against your saddle, using the heavy leather seat as a pillow, and pull your thick wool blanket up to your chin. The fire has burned down now, the bright yellow flames disappearing and leaving behind a bed of deep, glowing red embers that pulse with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. You watch the embers breathe, brightening into a brilliant crimson when a stray gust of wind catches them, then cooling into a soft gray ash. Your breathing begins to slow, matching the steady, ancient pulse of the fire and the land. The cold night air kisses your forehead, but you are wrapped in warmth, shielded by the silver logs, and drifting slowly into the deep, restorative quiet of the wilderness. The fire has fully collapsed now, leaving behind only a flat bed of dark scarlet coals that simmer beneath a delicate layer of silver ash. The heat has become a memory, lingering faintly in the dry cottonwood logs behind you, while the true, piercing frost of the desert midnight takes complete possession of the outpost. The air is so brittle and clear that every single star seems to have duplicated. The Milky Way forms a massive, glowing highway of cosmic dust that splits the sky clean in two. The world is so quiet that you can hear the tiny, metallic tink of your cooling campfire stones as they contract in the freezing darkness. You shift slightly beneath your heavy wool blanket, the coarse fabric rustling with a sharp, dry sound that seems to echo off the old cabin walls. Your horse remains standing just on the edge of the darkness, a heavy, solid shadow that occasionally lets out a long, wet breath that blooms into a cloud of white vapor before vanishing. It is completely still, its head lowered so far its muzzle almost touches the dirt, entering that deep, standing sleep that only animals of the plains can achieve. You watch the rhythmic rise and fall of its dark flank, using its steady existence as an anchor to keep yourself from spinning off into the vastness of the empty territory. In this deep hour, the mind begins to play tricks with the silence. As the wind moves across the miles of open sagebrush, it changes shape when it encounters the abandoned outpost. It slips through the gaps in the silver logs with a low, whistling hum that sounds remarkably like human voices whispering just beyond the threshold. If you listen too closely, you can almost hear the faint, ghostly chatter of the pioneers who once sat where you are sitting now. Their low laughter, the clink of their tin cups, the rustle of their long canvas coats. The desert holds onto these memories, trapping the vibrations of the past in the grain of the weathered timber and the molecules of the dry dirt, releasing them only when the world goes completely dead at midnight. Then, from the vast plains to the south, comes a sound that is not made by the wind. It is an incredibly distant, low vibration that travels through the earth before it travels through the air. A deep, rhythmic rumble, rumble, rumble that vibrates through the soles of your boots and into your spine. Your horse's ears instantly snap forward, its head lifting from its slumber as it alerts to the change. It is the sound of a herd, not a thundering stampede, but a slow, drifting mass of heavy bodies moving across the dark range. In the old days, it would have been a herd of 10,000 buffalo, a living carpet of fur and horn that shook the foundations of the earth as they migrated with the seasons. Tonight, it is likely a feral herd of wild mustangs, moving through the starlight to find a hidden water hole in the canyon. You lie perfectly still, listening to the ancient heartbeat of the moving animals. The rumble grows slightly louder, a beautiful, rolling thunder that stays miles away, never approaching the outpost but defining the massive scale of the wilderness around you. You can hear the occasional sharp crack of a hoof striking a loose stone in the distance, a tiny detail that cuts through the low roar. There is a profound comfort in knowing that out there, in the pitch-black void where no human eye can see, life is moving along its old, unwritten paths, completely independent of towns, railroads, or the laws of men. The wild horses are charting their own course through the starlight, unburdened. The vibration slowly peaks and then begins its long, gradual decline. The deep rumble softens into a low hum, then into a faint purr, until it finally dissolves back into the immense, velvet silence of the high plains. The horse lets out a final, reassuring snort and lowers its head once more, its ears relaxing back into their neutral tilt. The danger, if there ever was any, has passed by in the dark. You pull the edge of the blanket over your cheek, protecting your skin from the freezing draft that slips through the logs. The embers are almost completely black now, their crimson eyes closing one by one. You surrender yourself to the heavy, clean exhaustion of the trail, letting your thoughts drift away with the wild herd, sinking into the deep, dark, and protective embrace of the western night. The clock of the stars has turned past the absolute center of the night, entering that frozen, suspended window of time where the darkness feels thickest, and the dawn is still a distant myth. The world has reached its lowest temperature, a deep, penetrating frost that creeps silently across the plains, transforming the dew on the sagebrush into microscopic needles of ice. A thin, delicate layer of white hoarfrost now covers the outer edges of your wool blanket, glittering like ground diamonds whenever the starlight catches it. Every breath you take requires a small effort, the icy air stinging the inside of your nostrils and chest before warming within your lungs. You remain perfectly still beneath your layers of heavy canvas and wool, knowing that the slightest movement will break the pocket of warmth your body has painstakingly trapped during the early hours of the night. You look straight up at the sky through the open timbers of the caved-in roof. The stars no longer seem to move. They have locked into a brilliant, static grid that feels heavy, almost oppressive in its immense clarity. The Milky Way has shifted its angle, a massive, silent arch of silver dust that spans from the northern peaks down into the southern wastes. There is no moisture in the atmosphere to blur the view. The sky is a raw, naked window into the deep cosmos, completely indifferent to the small, shivering traveler watching from the dirt below. Behind you, your horse makes a sudden, sharp movement. It stamps its right hind hoof against the hard-packed dirt. Thud. A solid, hollow sound that shatters the silence like a stone dropped into a frozen pond. The animal is cold, its muscles shivering slightly beneath its thick winter coat to generate heat. You hear the crisp, metallic rattle of the iron bit as it shakes its head, trying to loosen the stiffness in its neck. You feel a pang of sympathy for the creature, standing there in the open layout of the lean-to with nothing but a log wall to break the wind. But this is the reality of the trail. The horse is built for this wilderness. Its blood is thick, its instincts are ancient, and it knows how to endure the long, freezing hours by turning its back to the draft and waiting for the sun. In this frozen quiet, your mind strips away the last remaining layers of the modern world. Why do people fear this kind of isolation? Because when you remove the artificial lights, the ticking clocks, and the endless clutter of society, you are left face to face with yourself. There are no distractions out here to hide from your own thoughts, your own regrets, or your own mortality. The desert acts as a massive mirror, reflecting your true self at you in the absolute stillness of the midnight hour. But if you do not fight the silence, if you open your arms and surrender to it, the fear dissolves. It is replaced by a profound, heavy clarity. You realize that your problems are small, your time on this earth is brief, and you are currently participating in a grand, ancient cycle that has been repeating for millions of years. The wind rises again, not with a roar, but with a low, mournful whistle that sounds like a distant train locomotive crying out across the empty prairie. It catches the loose, rusted iron hinges of the cabin's broken shutter, causing the wood to creak and scrape rhythmically against the stone logs. Scray, scray, scray. The sound is lonely, a repetitive mechanical ghost that tells the story of human abandonment. You don't find it frightening. Instead, the rhythmic scraping becomes a strange sort of lullaby, a steady, predictable pulse that gives you something to focus on while the rest of the world remains locked in ice. You count the gaps between the creaks, your mind slowing down with each repetition, matching the frozen tempo of the night. The deep crimson eye of the last remaining coal finally blinks out, disappearing beneath a heavy blanket of gray ash. The fire is dead, but its purpose has been served. You pull your hat further down, the stiff brim pressing against your eyebrows, and tuck your chin deep into the collar of your coat. The frost continues its silent work outside, painting the landscape in shades of silver and white. But inside your small cocoon of wool, you are safe. The wilderness is holding you in its frozen palm, keeping the rest of the world at bay while you drift deeper into the heavy, dreamless sleep of the high plains, completely surrendered to the absolute peace of the empty territory. The deep, static grid of the midnight sky begins to fracture, but not into light. It is the hour of the false dawn, a deceptive, psychological window of the night where the absolute blackness of the cosmos shifts into a cold, metallic steel gray. The stars do not vanish. Instead, they seem to recede deeper into the velvet ceiling, their piercing diamond light losing its sharp edge and becoming dull, like embers fading underwater. The horizon remains completely hidden, a seamless merger of dark earth and dark sky, but the quality of the air changes. It becomes heavier, denser, carrying the unmistakable, sharp scent of pure ice and frozen stone. You stir within your bedroll, your joints aching with the rigid stiffness that comes from sleeping on the unyielding earth. The movement causes the crust of hoarfrost on your blanket to crack and slide off with a faint, paper-like hiss. When you lift your head, the freezing air hits your throat like a physical blow, forcing you to breathe shallowly through your nose to warm the draft before it reaches your lungs. Every surface within the old outpost is now covered in a delicate, white fur of frost. The silver cottonwood logs look like bone in the dim, gray transition light, and the cold iron rivets on your saddlebags glisten with thousands of microscopic ice crystals. A few feet away, your horse is already awake. It did not wait for the sun. Its wild instincts told it that the absolute lowest point of the night had passed. You hear the heavy, wet sound of its nostrils clearing. A sudden, explosive snort that sends a thick plume of white steam rolling across the lean-to. The animal shifts its weight, its iron-shod hooves making a sharp, brittle clink as they break through the frozen crust of the topsoil. It turns its head to look at you, its large, dark eyes clear and alert in the steel-gray gloom. You can see the frost gathered on its long eyelashes and around the edges of its black muzzle, giving it the appearance of an ancient, mythical creature carved from the winter landscape itself. Why is the false dawn the hardest mile of any journey in the wilderness? Because it plays a cruel trick on the mind. It whispers that the night is over, yet the sun remains hours away, trapped behind the massive eastern ridges. The cold at this hour does not just sit on your skin. It burrows deep into your bones, making your muscles shiver with a slow, involuntary rhythm that saps your remaining energy. The temptation to stay buried in the canvas cocoon, to close your eyes and surrender to the heavy, freezing lethargy, is immense. But in the Old West, staying still during the freeze was a dangerous gamble. You must force your mind to take control of your body, overriding the complaints of your stiff muscles and the biting sting of the air. With a deliberate effort of will, you slide your arms out from beneath the wool blanket. The contrast is immediate and brutal, the icy air raking across your skin like thorns. You reach for your boots, which you kept tucked inside the bedroll near your feet to prevent the leather from freezing solid. They are cold, but supple enough to slip onto your feet. As you pull the leather straps tight, your breath rises in thick, rhythmic clouds, mixing with the steam from your horse's breathing until the small lean-to is filled with a ghostly, shifting mist. You stand up, your knees making a distinct popping sound in the silence, and plant your feet onto the frozen dirt. You step out from the shelter of the logs and look toward the east. There is no warmth there, no yellow or orange light, just a vast, indifferent expanse of slate gray that makes the western plains look like an endless sea of shadows. The wind has died down completely, leaving behind a silence so absolute it feels heavy, as though the entire world is frozen in place, holding its breath before the true transition begins. You run a numb hand along the frost-covered mane of your horse, feeling the steady, powerful pulse of life beneath the cold surface. You are both still here. You have survived the deep freeze of the high plains, And though the trail ahead is still shrouded in shadow, you are standing, you are awake, and you are ready to meet the morning. The cold, deceptive steel gray of the false dawn finally begins to dissolve, splintering along the eastern horizon into a thin, razor-sharp line of pale lemon yellow and deep, bruised magenta. It is the arrival of the true dawn, a slow and majestic bleeding of color that redefines the geometry of the high plains. The heavy, monolithic shadows that had fused the earth and sky during the night now begin to separate. The distant mesas, which had been nothing but dark walls, suddenly reveal their jagged crests and deep, shadowed fissures, catching the very first horizontal vectors of light. You stand by your horse, your boots frozen slightly to the crust of the topsoil, watching this daily resurrection of the world. The transition is not silent. As the first warmth touches the upper atmosphere, a low, rushing sigh of wind sweeps across the prairie from the east. It is a clean, sharp breeze that carries the scent of warming pine needles from the mountains and the dry, paper-like rustle of the frozen grass as the ice crystals on its blades begin to melt. The hoarfrost coating your saddle and gear changes texture, turning from a crystalline white into a glassy, wet sheen that drips slowly onto the dirt. Your horse stands completely transformed by the light. The pale yellow rays catch the steam rising from its flanks, turning the clouds of vapor into brilliant, glowing halos of gold that swirl around its head with every exhalation. The animal lifts its head, its nostrils flaring as it drinks in the morning wind, its ears snapping back and forth to catch the awakening sounds of the plains. A mile away, a small covey of prairie chickens breaks the silence, their low, bubbling drums echoing softly through the grass, followed by the high, piercing whistle of a meadowlark welcoming the sun. The dead, frozen void of midnight has passed. Life is reclaiming its territory. You move into action, your movements still somewhat stiff but gaining fluidity as your blood begins to circulate. It is time to prepare for the trail. You reach for the heavy leather bridle, using your hands to warm the iron bit once more before slipping it gently between your horse's teeth. The metal makes a familiar, solid clink against the animal's jaws, a sound that signals the official end of the night's rest. You lift the heavy saddle blanket, shaking off the remaining moisture, and swing the 40-pound leather tree onto the horse's back. The leather gives off a deep, rich groan as it settles, a comforting, familiar soundtrack to the beginning of another long day. You pull the cinch strap tight, watching the horse's chest deflate as it accepts the reality of the working day. You loop the leather through the iron ring, securing the buckle with a sharp, definitive pull. Your fingers are still cold, the skin splits slightly around the knuckles from the desert air, but you do not feel the discomfort. The visual spectacle around you takes complete possession of your senses. The sun finally clears the horizon, not with a sudden flash, but with a heavy, molten gravity, a sliver of blinding orange gold that instantly turns the sea of frost-covered grama grass into a shimmering field of liquid copper. You swing your right leg over the cantle, settling into the worn seat of the saddle with a deep, muffled sigh of the leather. The height gives you a new perspective on the vastness ahead. The trail is laid out before you like a dusty ribbon, cutting through the endless gold and purple landscape toward a distant, jagged pass in the mountains 30 miles away. There are no signs of human life, no fences, no roads, no wires, just the raw, beautiful, and terrifying freedom of the open territory. You give a gentle nudge with your heels, and the horse moves forward into a steady, rhythmic walk, its iron shoes breaking the frozen crust of the earth with a crisp, hollow crunch that marks the first yard of a new journey. The sun climbs higher, abandoning the edge of the world and mounting the sky with a fierce, blinding intensity that quickly burns away the last pale hues of dawn. The air is no longer cold, but it carries a crisp, electric freshness as the heat collides with the frozen remnants of the night. Across the vast prairie, a strange and beautiful phenomenon begins to unfold. The millions of tons of hoarfrost that had coated every blade of grama grass, every sagebrush leaf, and every weathered log of the old outpost begin to melt simultaneously. A thick, ghostly white vapor rises directly from the earth, blanketing the plains in a knee-high layer of shifting mist that makes your horse look as though it is walking through the clouds. The trail begins to lift, leaving the flat floor of the valley behind and climbing toward the base of a long, jagged spine of crimson clay and broken shale known as the Red Ridge. The path narrows significantly here, forcing your horse to step off the soft dirt and onto a shifting track of loose, plate-like stones that make a sharp, metallic clink, clink, clink with every step. The gradient is steep, demanding a new level of focus and effort from both horse and rider. You lean forward slightly in the saddle, shifting your weight over the horse's shoulders to make the ascent easier for its hindquarters, your hands holding the reins with a loose, trusting touch. You can feel the immense power of the animal working beneath you. Its hind legs drive into the loose shale, the muscles bunching and releasing with a rhythmic, heavy precision that vibrates right through the leather tree of the saddle and into your own thighs. Its breathing changes, shifting from the long, easy sighs of the flatlands to a deep, synchronized huffing, ha puff, that matches the cadence of its climbing steps. Small pebbles dislodged by its hooves slide down the steep slope behind you, skittering over the edge and plunging into the dry ravines below with a faint, cascading rattle that underscores the height you are gaining. Why was the Red Ridge Trail feared by freight wagons and lone riders alike? Because the crimson clay that gives the ridge its beauty is deceptive. Under the intense morning sun, the top layer dries into a fine, slippery powder that offers zero traction, while underneath, the soil retains a greasy, damp moisture that can cause a horse to slide without warning. One misstep on this narrow ledge, one sudden panic from a startled animal, and the weight of the saddle would drag both of you down the crumbling embankment. But you do not allow your mind to dwell on the drop. You keep your eyes fixed 3 yards ahead of the horse's ears, reading the texture of the stones, looking for the solid gray boulders that indicate anchored bedrock. As you reach the spine of the ridge, the wind hits you with a sudden, violent force. It is the high-altitude draft coming off the northern peaks, cold and unobstructed, whistling sharply through the crown of your hat and causing the heavy canvas of your jacket to snap like a wet towel. You pull the leather chin strap of your hat tight against your jaw to keep the wind from stealing it. The view from this vantage point is staggering. To your left, the vast valley you crossed yesterday stretches out like a massive, purple and gold carpet. Its dimensions so immense that the abandoned outpost you slept in is now nothing more than a microscopic gray dot lost in the sagebrush. To your right, a new territory opens up, a rugged, broken labyrinth of deep arroyos, hidden valleys, and twisted juniper forests that you will have to navigate before nightfall. You halt the horse on the crest of the ridge, allowing it to catch its breath. The animal stands with its legs planted wide, its nostrils wide and bright pink as it drinks in the thin, cold wind. The scent up here is completely different from the valley floor. It is stripped of dust and earth, carrying only the pure, clean aroma of high-altitude ozone and the faint, resinous pitch of distant pine forests. You reach down and pat the horse's neck, your hand sinking into the thick hair, which is now warm and damp with honest sweat. There is no rush to move on. You sit there in the sky, suspended between the country you have conquered and the wilderness that is waiting for your hooves, completely filled with the silent, lonely majesty of the high trail. The wind on the crest of the Red Ridge gives one final, violent tug at the brim of your hat before the trail turns sharply to the west, plunging downward into the rugged, broken labyrinth you spotted from the heights. The descent is a slow, back-breaking process that requires a completely different set of muscles from the climb. You lean back slightly in the saddle, shifting your weight toward the cantle to keep from overloading the horse's front legs as it steps down the steep, rocky switchbacks. The iron shoes slide and bite into the loose red shale, creating a continuous, cascading rattle of stones that rolls down the hillside ahead of you like a miniature avalanche. As you drop lower, the cold wind of the high ridge dies away, trapped by the rising walls of earth and stone. The heat returns, but it is a trapped, stagnant warmth that smells heavily of the dense juniper forest you are entering. These are not the tall, straight trees of the northern mountains. These are ancient, twisted desert junipers, their trunks gnarled and spiraled by decades of drought and fierce winds. Their bark is a shredded, silver-gray fabric, and their low, spreading branches are thick with dusty blue berries that fill the air with a sharp, medicinal sweetness. The trail narrows until the branches brush against your leather chaps with a dry, scratching sound. Scritch, scratch, scritch. That marks your entry into the maze. The visual horizon vanishes instantly. Surrounded by the twisted trees and the low clay banks, your world is compressed into a tight, immediate circle. The sun, now approaching its afternoon angle, cuts through the dusty green canopy in sharp, brilliant shafts of light that create a dizzying pattern of bright gold and deep black shadows on the dirt path. It is an unsettling environment for a lone rider. In the open prairie, you can see danger coming from miles away, but here in the labyrinth, the view is blocked at every bend. A mountain lion resting on a low branch, a horn-faced steer hiding in the brush, or another traveler coming from the opposite direction would not be seen until you were within spitting distance. Your horse reflects this tension. Its ears are no longer relaxed. They are pinned forward, twitching rapidly at every crack of a dry twig or rustle of a lizard in the fallen needles. The stride is shorter, more hesitant. It places each hoof with immense care, sniffing the air occasionally for the scent of predators or hidden water. You keep your right hand resting lightly on your thigh, close to the worn leather of your holster, not out of fear, but out of the quiet, habitual alertness that the wilderness demands of anyone who wishes to survive it. You don't look at your watch or think about the miles. You simply become part of the rhythm of the maze, navigating each blind turn with a steady eye and a calm hand on the reins. The silence here is dense, muffled by the thick carpet of dried juniper needles that covers the ground. The sharp, metallic clink of the iron shoes is gone, replaced by a soft, padded thud. Whump, whump, whump. That makes your movement through the forest feel ghostly and detached. The only other sound is the occasional, scolding cry of a gray juniper jay, startled from its perch by your sudden appearance. It lets out a harsh, rhythmic shriek that echoes briefly through the trees before the heavy silence swallows it whole. The contrast between the open sky of the ridge and this claustrophobic forest is absolute, forcing your mind to narrow its focus, filtering out all abstract thoughts until you are living entirely in the next 10 feet of trail. The path twists deeper into the heart of the labyrinth, dropping into a dry creek bed where the sand is white and deep. The horse's hooves sink into the loose grains with a soft, sliding hiss that sounds like water moving over stone. The banks of the wash rise above your head, exposing the tangled, red roots of the junipers clinging desperately to the eroding soil. You are deep inside the veins of the earth now, moving through a hidden world where time seems to have stopped completely. You let the horse find its footing in the heavy sand, trusting its ancient blood to guide you through the shadows of the maze toward whatever clearing lies beyond the trees. The white sand of the dry creek bed grows wider, eventually swallowing the last twisted outposts of the juniper forest and transforming into a massive, sun-bleached arroyo. The walls of this dry riverbed rise 15 feet high on either side, carved into smooth, undulating curves by the seasonal torrents of flash floods that roar through here during the summer storms. Now, however, it is a monument to drought. The floor of the wash is a blinding expanse of pale gravel, river rocks, and the sun-bleached skeletons of ancient cottonwood branches that have been tossed around like matchsticks by the water and left to bake into a chalky white under the sun. The heat inside the arroyo is intense, trapped between the dirt banks and reflected directly off the white sand beneath your horse's hooves. There is no breeze down here. The air is thick, dry, and heavy with the scent of baked clay and old, alkaline dust. Every step your horse takes is a slow, sinking effort. The loose gravel slides beneath its iron shoes with a continuous, grinding crunch. SKRCH, SKRCH, SKRCH. That seems to vibrate up through the stirrups and into your boots. You can feel the sweat slicking your skin beneath your shirt, and the dust from the wash rises in small, lazy puffs that coat your leather chaps and the horse's chest in a fine, gray powder. You keep your eyes trained on the curves of the banks ahead, watching the way the roots of the dead trees hang over the edge like tangled knots of gray rope. Riding down a dry wash is always a calculated risk in this territory. If a storm breaks over the mountains 30 miles away, this empty, burning ditch can turn into a 10-foot wall of mud and roaring debris in less than 15 minutes, with no warning other than a low, distant rumble through the earth. But today, the sky visible above the high banks is a clear, unyielding blue, empty of clouds. The danger here is not water, but the absolute lack of it. Your canteen is half empty, the water inside warm and tasting strongly of the tin casing. The trail follows a sharp bend in the wash where the current has carved a deep, shadowed alcove into the base of a solid granite ledge. As you approach, your horse's ears instantly snap forward, its head dropping low toward the sand. It lets out a short, eager whinny, its stride quickening despite the heavy gravel. You smell it a second later, a sharp, metallic tang in the air, cold and damp, cutting through the dry heat of the arroyo. It is the scent of an iron spring, a hidden seep where water filters slowly through the deep fractures of the granite rock and pools in a small, stone basin before disappearing back into the sand. You bring the horse to a stop near the ledge and slide down from the saddle, your boots hitting the loose gravel with a heavy, sliding thud. The shade inside the alcove is instant and freezing, a 20-degree drop that makes you shiver as the cold air hits your sweat-dampened neck. The pool is no larger than a wash basin, the water perfectly still and dark as ink, its surface reflecting a tiny, distorted square of the blue sky above. The stones around the edge are stained a deep, rust red from the heavy iron content of the spring. You kneel on the damp gravel, checking the water first. It is clear, free of the white crust of alkaline poison, and bubbling slowly from a tiny crack in the granite. You do not let the horse drink immediately. A hot animal gulping freezing water will founder and ruin itself within minutes. You hold its head back by the leather reins, letting it smell the pool while you cup your hands into the water. It is ice cold, so cold it makes your knuckles ache instantly. You lift your hands and drink. The water is heavy, tasting strongly of iron and crushed stone, but it is pure, vibrant life. It cuts through the dust in your throat like a knife, sending a shock of cold energy straight to your stomach. You take 3 slow swallows, then step back, allowing your horse to drop its muzzle into the pool. The animal drinks with a steady, rhythmic pumping of its throat, the water splashing softly against the stone. A beautiful, liquid melody that fills the dark alcove with the sound of survival. The icy water of the iron spring provides a brief, surging burst of energy that carries you and your horse out of the suffocating heat of the bleached arroyo. The trail lifts once more, climbing out of the high dirt banks and spilling you onto an elevated, windswept plateau known as the Valley of Pillars. Here, the landscape changes its face entirely. The rolling waves of gold grama grass are gone, replaced by a vast, flat floor of dark volcanic ash and black gravel. Rising out of this dark earth are dozens of massive vertical monoliths of red sandstone. Giant, freestanding pillars carved by eons of wind into the shapes of ancient towers, ruined castles, and silent, frozen sentinels. The sun is sinking rapidly now, its lower edge just brushing the jagged, snow-capped teeth of the western mountains. The angle of the light is incredibly low, sending the sharp, dark shadows of the giant pillars stretching for hundreds of yards across the black floor of the valley. The contrast is spectacular and surreal. The dark ash beneath your horse's hooves is already submerged in a deep, cool purple shadow, while the tops of the stone monoliths are ablaze with a fierce, blinding crimson and orange light, looking like massive torches burning against the darkening sky. The silence on this plateau is different from the heavy, muffled quiet of the juniper maze. Here, the wind has room to move. It sweeps across the flat expanse from the north, cold and unobstructed, whistling with a high, mournful pitch as it cuts through the narrow gaps between the stone towers. The sound is continuous, a low, droning hum that sounds remarkably like an ancient choir singing a song with no words. Your horse shifts its pace, its iron shoes making a sharp, hollow tack, tack, tack against the hard volcanic crust, the sound echoing cleanly off the vertical rock faces as you pass beneath them. You pull your wool coat tight across your chest, buttoning the stiff collar up to your throat to lock out the rapidly dropping temperature. In this high territory, the transition from day to night is violent. The moment the sun slips behind the peaks, the heat of the air vanishes instantly, replaced by a biting, high-altitude frost that demands immediate preparation. You look ahead, your eyes scanning the base of the pillars for any sign of a protective nook, a cave, or a shallow overhang where you can establish a camp before the darkness becomes absolute. Riding among these giant stone structures feels like navigating the ruins of an empire that existed long before the first human footprint was pressed into the dirt of this continent. The scale is immense, a vertical city built by nature that makes your existence feel fleeting and unimportant. You look up at a massive pillar that towers 100 feet above your head. Its surface is etched with deep, horizontal lines left by centuries of blowing sand, each line a layer of time, a page of history that has never been read. A deep sense of humility washes over you, a peaceful realization that you are simply a silent ghost passing through an immortal landscape. The sun drops further, disappearing behind the mountains with a sudden, final plunge. The fiery orange light on the tops of the pillars snaps out instantly, as if someone had blown out a row of candles, and the entire valley is plunged into a uniform, deep indigo twilight. The wind picks up strength, carrying the first sharp flakes of high desert frost that sting the skin of your cheeks. You tighten your grip on the leather reins, guiding your horse toward a massive, horseshoe-shaped alcove at the base of a twin pillar. It is a natural fortress, a sanctuary of stone that will shield you from the northern gale. You dismount, your boots crunching solidly into the black gravel, ready to face the dark hours in the shadow of the ancient sentinels. The twilight deepens rapidly, shifting from a rich indigo to a heavy, charcoal black that leaves the tops of the massive stone pillars looking like jagged tears in the velvet sky. The wind, trapped within the horseshoe-shaped alcove of the twin monoliths, circles around you in slow, freezing eddies, carrying the sharp scent of old dust and incoming frost. The volcanic gravel beneath your feet is completely dark now, absorbing what little starlight manages to pierce the high clouds. You move with a deliberate, slow precision, your boots making a heavy, sliding sound, crunch, slide, crunch, as you clear a small circular patch of earth for your camp. You gather large, flat chunks of black volcanic rock scattered around the base of the pillar, arranging them into a tight, defensive ring. This obsidian circle will serve a dual purpose. It will contain the heat of your fire, reflecting it toward your bedroll, and it will shield the delicate flames from the sudden, violent gusts of wind that sweep across the plateau. Once the ring is secure, you reach into your saddlebags, your fingers working entirely by feel in the dark, and pull out a handful of dry juniper twigs you had split and saved during your passage through the labyrinth hours ago. You kneel within the stone circle, your knees pressing into the cold, gritty ash. Your hands are stiff, the skin on your knuckles tight and numb from the biting mountain draft. You strike your steel against the flint, a sharp, downward snap that sends a brilliant shower of orange sparks cascading into the nest of shredded juniper bark. One spark catches, a tiny, fragile pinprick of red light that pulses with the rhythm of your breath as you lean low and blow gently onto the tinder. A thin, sweet spiral of blue smoke rises into your face, followed by a sudden, cheerful snap as the dry wood catches, casting the first dancing shadows against the vertical granite wall behind you. Your horse stands tied to a low, twisted root near the mouth of the alcove, its massive silhouette blocking out a section of the starry sky. The sudden appearance of the firelight reflects in its dark, intelligent eyes, turning them into two glowing embers that watch your movements with quiet curiosity. It lifts its front hoof and stamps it down onto the hard volcanic crust. Thud. A solid, grounding sound that breaks the low drone of the wind. The animal is settling in, its back turned to the open valley, using its own bulk to create a partial windbreak for the small camp you have built together. You feed the fire with thicker pieces of dead sagebrush roots, watching the yellow flames grow until they fill the obsidian ring with a steady, pulsating heat. The aromatic smoke rises straight up, trapped for a moment within the stone alcove before being torn away by the higher winds above the pillars. You lean your back against the smooth sandstone wall of the monolith, pulling your thick wool blanket over your shoulders and letting the warmth of the fire thaw the deep chill in your chest. The modern world, with its frantic speed and endless noise, has no power here. It cannot reach into this ancient stone sanctuary. Out on the open plateau, the wilderness responds to your light. A lone desert owl lets out a low, hollow cry from the top of a neighboring pillar. Hoo, hoo, hoo. A lonely, rhythmic punctuation that underscores the immense isolation of the valley. You do not feel lonely, however. You feel a deep, grounding sense of belonging. You have found water, you have climbed the ridge, navigated the maze, and built a shelter in the shadow of the sentinels. You take a small sip of the iron-tasting water from your canteen, close your eyes beneath the brim of your hat, and let the steady crackle of the juniper fire carry your mind deep into the quiet, protective dark of the high frontier. The midnight hour arrives with a heavy, cinematic stillness that locks the Valley of Pillars into a deep freeze. The high, drifting clouds that had obscured the sky during twilight have been swept away by the upper atmospheric currents, leaving behind a raw, naked cosmos. The stars are terrifyingly bright, clustered together in thick, crystalline rivers of white and blue fire that stretch across the absolute blackness. The light they cast is so pure, so unhindered by dust or moisture, that it strikes the volcanic floor of the valley, carving long, faint, and ghostly shadows of the twin pillars that stretch toward the southern horizon like dark highways. Inside your horseshoe-shaped alcove, the sagebrush fire has burned down to its core. The bright, snapping yellow flames have vanished, replaced by a thick, breathing bed of incandescent scarlet coals that pulse with a slow, rhythmic heat beneath a delicate shroud of gray ash. You lie perfectly still upon your canvas bedroll, your body tightly wrapped within the heavy wool blanket. The frost has begun its silent, intricate work, painting a delicate border of white crystal needles along the stiff leather brim of your hat and the top fold of your collar. Every exhalation leaves your lips as a dense, white plume of steam that drifts upward into the starlight before dissolving into the dry, freezing air. The silence of this high plateau is not empty. It has a weight, a physical pressure that presses against your ears like the deep water of an ocean. In this absolute quiet, the acoustic landscape of the valley becomes highly sensitive. Miles away, a small shelf of sandstone, fractured by the intense frost, breaks free from the face of a distant monolith and tumbles to the volcanic floor below. The sound travels across the flat expanse, bouncing from pillar to pillar. Crack, boom, rumble. A series of hollow, metallic echoes that grow softer with each reflection until the immense silence of the desert swallows the final vibration whole. Your horse's ears instantly snap forward, its head lifting from its standing slumber to track the fading resonance through the dark. You watch the dark silhouette of your mount against the starry sky. It stands perfectly still at the mouth of the alcove, its front leg tucked up, its muzzle breathing slowly into the dirt. The steam from its nostrils rises in rhythmic, ghostly bursts that are momentarily illuminated by the soft, red glow of the dying embers. There is an unspoken, ancient partnership in this shared watchfulness. Out here, 100 miles from the nearest settlement, the horse is your only connection to life, your only protection against the vast, uncaring vacuum of the wilderness. It trusts you to keep the fire alive. You trust it to alert you to whatever moves through the blackness beyond the stone ring. Why does this specific hour of the trail hold such a deep, meditative power? Because at midnight, the boundaries of time seem to blur. Sitting in the shadow of these ancient towers, wrapped in the same wool and leather that travelers used a century ago, you realize that the wilderness does not change. It does not care about the progress of men, the building of cities, or the passing of eras. The red sand, the black gravel, and the icy stars remain exactly as they were, an immortal canvas that accepts your temporary presence without ever acknowledging it. This realization does not bring loneliness. Instead, it brings a profound, liberating peace. It strips away the phantom anxieties of the civilized world, reducing your entire existence to a few basic, beautiful truths. The warmth in your chest, the breath in your lungs, and the solid stone at your back. You reach out a numb hand from beneath the blanket, gently nudging a stray piece of juniper wood into the center of the obsidian ring. The red coals accept the offering instantly, a thin, blue line of aromatic smoke rising into the dark, followed by a sudden, brilliant flash of yellow light as the dry bark catches. The new flame dances across the silver-gray bark, casting a fresh wave of warmth that touches your frozen cheeks and coaxes your muscles into a state of total, relaxed surrender. You close your eyes beneath the shadow of your hat, letting the steady, rhythmic crackle of the wood become your heartbeat, sinking effortlessly into the deep, protective sanctuary of the western night. The deep, static freeze of the late night begins to yield, not to warmth, but to that heavy, leaden stillness that precedes the dawn. The rivers of stars that had blazed so fiercely across the velvet sky lose their sharp, diamond edge, blurring into a cold, uniform steel gray. The wind that had droned through the stone towers all night drops to an absolute whisper, leaving behind a silence so dense and complete that it feels almost solid. The temperature has hit its lowest floor. The entire valley of pillars is locked in an icy, white shroud of hoarfrost that turns the black volcanic gravel into a glittering field of silver in the dim transition light. You stir within your bedroll, your muscles protesting with a dull, rigid ache from the long hours spent on the hard-packed earth. The slightest movement causes the frozen crust on your wool blanket to crack with a faint, dry sound like paper tearing. When you draw a breath, the freezing air hits your throat with an icy sting, forcing you to breathe shallowly through your nose to warm the air before it reaches your chest. Every surface within your horseshoe-shaped sanctuary is covered in thousands of tiny, delicate ice crystals. Your saddlebags, your boots, and the rough sandstone face of the monolith behind you are all painted in the pale, ghostly uniform of the high desert frost. A few feet away, your horse shifts its weight, its iron shoes breaking through the frozen crust of the topsoil with a sharp, brittle clink. It has already abandoned its standing sleep, its wild instincts alerting it to the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The animal lets out a massive, explosive snort, sending a dense plume of white steam rolling across the alcove like a cloud of smoke. You can see the white frost gathered thick along its mane, its long eyelashes, and around the edges of its dark muzzle. It looks like a creature carved from the winter landscape itself, ancient, resilient, and completely tuned to the brutal rhythms of the wilderness. You force yourself to sit up, overriding the heavy lethargy that tempts you to stay buried within the warm canvas cocoon. In the territory, the false dawn is the most critical hour. Staying still allows the cold to settle deep into your joints, making the work of the coming day twice as difficult. You reach for your heavy leather boots, which you kept tucked deep inside the bedroll near your feet to prevent the leather from freezing solid. They are cold and stiff, but as you pull the straps tight, the familiar, mechanical tightness brings a surge of focus back to your mind. You stand up, your knees popping in the silence, and step out from the shelter of the stone ledge to face the eastern sky. The horizon is no longer black. A thin, razor-sharp line of pale lemon yellow and deep, smoky purple has begun to cut through the slate-gray sky, defining the distant mountains 30 miles away. There is no heat in that light yet, but it signals the official end of the night's long vigil. You walk over to your horse, running a numb hand along its frosted shoulder, feeling the immense, burning warmth of its skin working beneath the winter coat. You have both made it through the deepest freeze of the high plateau. The campfire is nothing but a circle of cold, gray ash within the obsidian ring, but the fire inside you is fully awake, ready to break camp and conquer the final miles of the trail. The pale lemon line along the eastern horizon expands with a sudden, magnificent velocity, bleeding into vast ribbons of brilliant copper, liquid gold, and deep, fiery crimson. The true dawn has arrived, shattering the cold steel gray of the night and pouring a flood of horizontal light across the Valley of Pillars. The transformation is instantaneous. The tops of the massive stone monoliths catch the very first rays of the sun, glowing as though they are burning from within, while the floor of the valley remains submerged in a sea of cool, purple shadows that rapidly retreat before the advancing light. The rising sun triggers a sudden, dramatic shift in the atmosphere. As the heat collides with the frozen earth, the millions of tons of hoarfrost coating the volcanic ash and the sagebrush begin to melt all at once. A thick, white vapor rises directly from the ground, blanketing the plateau in a knee-high layer of shifting mist that makes your horse look as though it is standing in the clouds. The wind returns, a clean, sharp breeze from the east that carries the scent of warming earth, old stone, and the distant, resinous perfume of the mountain pines you have been tracking for days. You move through the familiar, comforting ritual of breaking camp with a steady, practiced efficiency. You lift the heavy leather bridle, warming the iron bit in your hands before slipping it gently between your horse's teeth. The metal makes a crisp, solid clink against the animal's jaws, a sound that officially breaks the rest of the night. Next, you shake the moisture from the saddle blanket and swing the 40-pound leather tree onto the horse's back. The leather gives off a deep, rich groan as it settles into place, a comforting, familiar soundtrack that signals the transition from shelter back to the open trail. You pull the canvas cinch strap tight, locking the buckle with a sharp, definitive pull that makes the horse let out a long, shuddering breath of acceptance. You hoist your heavy leather saddlebags over the cantle, buckling them down tight against the frame, and ensure your canteen is securely fastened to the horn. Every motion is deliberate, a testament to the miles behind you and the discipline required to survive the miles ahead. You take one final look around the horseshoe-shaped alcove, The obsidian ring you built, the gray ashes of your fire, the smooth stone wall that protected your spine. Leaving the camp exactly as you found it, a temporary sanctuary reclaimed by the desert. You swing your right leg over the saddle, settling into the worn, familiar leather seat with a deep, quiet satisfaction. From this elevated position, the entire landscape opens up before you, illuminated by the blinding, golden glare of the morning sun. The trail cuts through the giant pillars like a dusty, red ribbon, leading straight toward the wide, open gap in the western mountains where your journey will finally meet its destination. You check the cinches one last time, pull the brim of your hat low against the morning glare, and give your horse a gentle nudge with your heels, ready to ride out of the shadows of the sentinels and into the brilliant light of the new day. The iron shoes of your horse strike the volcanic crust with a crisp, echoing crunch as you ride out from the shadow of the twin pillars, leaving your sanctuary behind. The sun has fully cleared the horizon now, standing small, white, and intensely hot in a sky that has bleached into a brilliant, cloudless azure. The rising vapors of the morning have entirely dissolved into the dry air, revealing the full, staggering scale of the territory ahead. The Valley of Pillars gradually widens out, its giant stone sentinels growing smaller and more scattered behind you until they become nothing more than red fingers pointing toward the sky, lost in the shifting heat shimmer of the high plateau. The trail begins to slope gently downward, leaving the black volcanic ash behind and returning to the familiar, rolling waves of gold grama grass and dusty green sagebrush. The rhythm of the ride settles into a deep, hypnotic cadence. The steady thud, clack, thud, clack of the hooves, the rhythmic creak of the saddle leather, and the long, easy breathing of your mount beneath you. The exhaustion of the past days, the cold of the midnights, and the brutal heat of the noons have all melted away, replaced by a profound, unshakable clarity. You are no longer fighting the wilderness. You have become an organic part of its vast, silent machinery. Up ahead, the gap in the western mountains begins to define itself, the jagged, snow-capped peaks rising high into the sky like a massive gateway of granite and ice. The trail leads you directly toward it, cutting a straight, unswerving line through the endless prairie. There are no boundaries here, no fences to restrict your movement, no roads to dictate your path, and no clocks to measure your time. You are moving through a world that exists exactly as it did 10,000 years ago, a boundless, beautiful expanse that offers the ultimate, terrifying reward: absolute freedom. You pull gently on the reins, bringing your horse to a temporary halt on the crest of a low, rolling ridge that overlooks the final valley. The animal stands quietly, its ears pointed forward, its dark coat gleaming like polished chestnut under the brilliant morning sun. A light, cool wind sweeps down from the mountains, brushing against your face and carrying the clean, sharp scent of alpine snow and rushing river water. You look back one last time at the miles of red ridge, hidden canyons, and stone pillars you have crossed, then turn your eyes back to the horizon ahead. The journey does not truly end. The destination is simply the beginning of the next trail. You reach down and pat your horse's neck, a silent gesture of gratitude for its strength, its endurance, and its unwavering trust through the dark hours. The animal lets out a short, content snort and shakes its mane, as if it understands that the final stretch is at hand. You adjust your weight in the saddle, loosen your grip on the leather reins, and give a quiet command. The horse moves forward into a steady, confident trot, its hooves lifting the red dust of the territory as you ride forward together, tracking the sun, mastering the wilderness, and disappearing into the beautiful, endless light of the open frontier.